if a public debate were to be held today, how many voices from the Indic side can we identify who can hold their own against the best of voices which the other side can field and prove their point of view in a language that they understand? Handful. It's literally a handful. Therefore, the Indic Renaissance or the civilizational renaissance that we speak of is not going to come only at the ground level, or it's not going to happen at one level. It has to happen at multiple levels. 1,000 different revolutions, 1,000 different mini revolutions have to bloom and blossom across the country. If at all, there has to be an Indic Renaissance in the future. And for that to happen, you need to master the art of debating, the art of articulation, the art of building an argument and giving depth to your argument. We seem to be purveyors of myths, or at least we don't know how to prove that something is not a myth. Somebody constantly hails this as a slur at you. You're an idol worshipper, you're a cow worshipper. Either you repel that and say, I'm not this, or you try and prove why this is the case and why there is nothing to be ashamed about. But you will never do that for the simple reason that you would rather hide under a rock and evade that particular argument than meet that argument head on. And that is the reason that each time you run away from a certain discussion, you are gradually encouraging within yourself the inability to repel an argument on an intellectual level. Unless and until you hone the ability and sharpen the ability to constantly engage with the other side, you will never be in a position to win the hearts and minds of the popular public. Let me give you one more example. Whenever you think of, let's say, a missionary organization or a church, two institutions immediately come to your head when you think of a church: a school and a hospital. Correct? You think of a church, the moment the first thing that comes to your head is a school and a hospital, or at least an orphanage and let's say a home for the elderly. Have you ever asked yourself, why don't temples have similar institutions? The lazy conclusion that most people arrive at is, philanthropy is a concept which is alien to Hindus, and philanthropy is a concept which is alien to temples. Temples are only interested in covering their gods and their spires in gold and silver, and they have no interest in doing anything for the common society. We will always speak and give the example of a langar of a gurudwara, or the church and hospital, or the hospital and school of a church, but we will not have such comparable examples to give as far as a temple is concerned. Have we ever asked ourselves, why is this reason? Why does it exist this way? What is the reason for this state of affairs? That is something that has been lost in the sands of time. Most people don't even know who controls the wealth that comes from the temple. Who controls the resources of the temple? Why is it that you have a Hindu endowments board in every secular government, state government, but you don't find similar establishments or similar ministries for places of worship of other communities? What does this tell you? We have not taken an interest in this. It doesn't matter to us. We are fundamentally survivalists. We are fundamentally individualists. As long as you have greener pastures to go after, and you're in a position to secure your own nest, you're in a position to feather your own nest, you have no interest in seeing beyond that. Please remember that there are 3 stages that a civilization goes through, usually. 1, where it is aware of its identity. 2nd, where it is in the process of losing its identity. 3rd, when it completely loses its identity. And when there is a vacuum, something is bound to fill that vacuum. If you don't fill it up yourself and you create an identity for yourself, somebody else is going to do for that. So we may be progenitors of an advanced civilization, but we are certainly at an advanced stage of decay. And unless and until we we identify as to who we are and what we wish to do, in the future, you will always find yourself in the politically incorrect position of defending your own faiths. You'll find yourself in the tragic position of having to defend every tradition which is native to this particular land. Because they will come and tell you, you are fools, your forefathers were fools, the entire value system that your society has followed for thousands of years is based on myth and superstition and nothing beyond that, and you will not even have credible answers to give. Because you don't know who you are and where you come from. Therefore, Indic Renaissance is impossible until we go beyond Twitter and Facebook and equip ourselves with facts, with information, looking at our own history. And it's not really difficult to do. Between the 18th century and early 20th century, giants have literally identified and written fantastic books on India, on India's past. You only need to dig it up. You only need to arm yourself with those facts. You only need to recraft it and represent it. Because if you don't do so, all you're left with is post-20th century and 21st century books, all of which has been written by others, with a specific agenda and a specific interest to push. And this is one aspect that I think becomes very, very important, which is almost in every fight or in every initiative, you will find yourself alone. It either becomes a caste-related issue or it becomes, let's say, a region-related issue or a language-related issue, but it never transcends beyond that. Hopefully, there will come a time where we will recognize that if we do not find for ourselves a common identity, we will be picked apart one by one. And we will not even know it. Riots happen in Gujarat against a certain community. It matters to people from that particular faith across the country, across the world. Riots happen with respect to a different community in Bengal. It doesn't matter to anyone who lives in the neighboring state of Bengal. It doesn't make news at all. It doesn't shake a single soul. It doesn't stir a single conscience. How many of you have heard of Dhulagad riots in Bengal? Were there any protests for those people in this part of the country? While there are protests for Rohingyas all over the country who don't even belong to this country. The turnout for this topic is perhaps representative of the state of affairs. Apathy is the beginning of destruction of a civilization. After years of going through nasty experience from 700 AD till perhaps even today, we still haven't learned our lessons. The problem is we have somehow managed to imbibe this particular tradition that do not judge thy neighbor. Because the moment you judge, you're seen as discriminating, you're seen as subscribing to a fascist ideology. It is important to judge. It is important to apply your faculties of discrimination to see what is right, what is wrong, who is right and who is wrong. Because if you can't speak the truth, if you do not have the guts to speak the truth, then you deserve to wither away. And you will. Israel from one end to another will not take more than 2 hours to traverse. That country is smaller than the state of New Jersey. A community which was otherwise the original inhabitants of that entire region has been reduced to that one small triangle, a sliver of a triangle in that particular place. Ask yourself, is our position any different? What were our borders before 1947? Where are we today? What is the consequence of alteration of demographics thanks to illegal immigration that's happening in this country? Let me see, and let's see where we are. How many people do you think are illegal immigrants in this country from Bangladesh? How many illegal Bangladeshis do you think are in this country? A rough figure would help. That will tell us what we actually know of the situation. Sorry? 2 to 3 crores was a figure given in early 2000s. Today, we are looking at 6 to 7 crores. There was a time when this problem was limited only to the northeast of the country, and we've always given stepmotherly treatment to the northeast, therefore it didn't make too much of a difference to us. But it is now no more a problem that is limited to the northeast. Look at the statistics, look at the figures, and you'll ask yourself, what is happening? In your lifetime, this country and this society will change, and this will no more be the place that you will even recognize. You go to Assam and you ask any Assamese, he will tell you, less than 40% of that state has native Indians. The rest come from Bangladesh. We may be thinking that we helped the creation of Bangladesh and therefore they are grateful to us. But we don't understand that Bangladesh was previously East Pakistan. So they made a choice in 1947. They carved for themselves a certain identity in 1947. Merely because they separated from West Pakistan doesn't change their original decision to stay away from secular India. Why is this important? Because as far as we are concerned, since we have told ourselves that we don't have a specific identity, we don't seem to have a problem with illegal immigration also. Because then we'll immediately cite an ancient Indian tradition. Atithi Devo Bhava, they have to come. How can we behave like this as far as these people are concerned? We have welcomed the Jews, we have welcomed the Afghans, we have welcomed the Tibetans. Why can't we welcome these people? Have Tibetans killed you? In all the years that Tibetans have lived in this country since the invasion of their country, have you heard one riot between Tibetans and Indians? At least in the name of religion. Jews have been living in this country for millennia. They too are a monotheistic faith. Have you heard of one problem between Jews and non-Jews? Parsis have lived in this country. They perhaps constitute the best definition of a minority because today their population is 60,000 and even going down. You've never had a problem as far as they are concerned. So how is it that a position with respect to one particular group is immediately interpreted as an anti-minority position when I don't seem to have a problem with any other minority? They are minorities in the true sense of the word. What does this tell you? And I have to impress upon you this important aspect. 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, those places where you would have comfortably been in a position to celebrate your festivals or enjoy your traditions and customs, today you need permission in those places to celebrate your own festivals. What has happened in Calcutta, what has happened in West Bengal, and the need for judicial intervention for you to be able to carry out your own processions and to celebrate your own festival is a wake-up call for the rest of the country. If you do not wake up right now, in your own lifetime, you will find 1,000 warmongers and barbarians standing outside your home and asking you to give up or give up your faith, give up your life or give up your faith. And if I don't know if how many people are even following the news in Kerala. Every day, almost 15 girls are being shipped to Syria. Almost 15 girls on a daily basis. Please wake up to these things for the simple reason that if you think India is only a place where you earn a degree and run away to the West, perhaps the future will, the next generation will not even have an India to do so. You will not be in a position to do that either. Importantly, you can leave this country and run from one country to another, but can you abandon your identity altogether? That will continue to hound you. And someone who has a problem with your fundamental identity, it doesn't make a difference to him whether you're in India or any other place. As long as you don't give up that particular identity, he's going to come after you. Therefore, an Indic Renaissance is not an academic discussion. It is not a discussion meant for, let's say, wine tasting rooms, or it's not a discussion meant for just books. It has a very real relevance to the existential issues that face this country today. So my request would be that we need to choose for ourselves how do we wish to contribute to this renaissance in one way or the other. You can either be the financiers of this particular movement, or you can be the influencers of this particular movement. You can be the thought leaders of this particular movement, or you can be the grassroots activist. But you must take part in this particular movement in one way or the other, because if you don't do so, your children will not live in the same India that you lived. And you certainly don't live in the same India that your parents lived. We are willing to treat everybody as our equal. And for us, it doesn't make a difference who comes from what faith. But it seems to matter to the other side. Unfortunately so. So wake up to this reality and find an area where you can contribute to the Indic Renaissance in one way or the other.